Fountainhead Forum 7. This is Latina Libertarian. Also, her real name is Olga Maria. So how are you doing today, Olga? We're going to talk about...
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yes, we're going to talk about the Reno Reset and the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and libertarian politics in general. First of all, tell me, how did you get started with all this? It sounds like you were a Bernie supporter at one point.
Yeah, actually, I was. I really started off my activism many years ago when I was in college, and I really started off as a leftist. That's just what was around me. I became an activist, and I was around a lot of socialists, and I identified myself as a socialist for many years, and really involved with just like community activism. I was involved with the Puerto Rican independence movement, and I was involved with the demilitarization of a military base in Puerto Rico in Vieques, where the U.S. Navy had been bombing for many years. And so that was my circle. And I identified as a Marxist for a few years. And I traveled to Cuba, and I saw a lot of contradictions there with what I was told and led to believe. And so that really kind of started challenging a lot of ideas that I had, and just kind of realizing how authoritarian these ideas were. And really at my core, I was always very anti-authoritarian and anti-war. And just over time and kind of like going up to the Obama presidency, realizing that the left abandoned the being anti-war. And so I stopped being political. I stopped being an activist on that level. I got much more involved in health freedom, activism, and becoming a mom and working in healthcare and looking into like advocacy and trying to understand like what is wrong with our system. We ended up moving up to Vermont. I'm originally from New York City, born and raised, and also being in a rural area and meeting people like of different experiences and talking with them, becoming a gun owner, just all these like things that just started shifting my a lot of preconceived notions that I had about what that was, and just challenging. And I had a good friend who we worked together a lot, and we connected with health choice and medical freedom issues. And she would talk about being a libertarian, a constitutional libertarian. And I never heard what a libertarian was. And so it was just kind of like this new idea. And I go into like different Facebook groups and different things like that. And then living in Vermont, I became involved with some of the Second Amendment stuff because they were trying to pass gun control laws. And Vermont is a constitutional carry state. And becoming a gun owner was actually something that also really started shifting a lot of my ideas about the importance of like self-defense and understanding like what that means and individual rights and taking ownership and responsibility of certain things. And so eventually I found that there was a local county libertarian party, and they were having a meeting, and I decided to go. I was like really interested in understanding like what libertarianism was about, and I'm still new to it, but I joined that county party, and I had asked a friend of mine there, like, what's a good way for me to learn about libertarianism, to learn more, to keep learning. And he recommended listening to the Tom Woods podcast, which I started doing, and I really did learn a lot and started reading. And Tom Woods podcast, he interviewed Michael Heiss, who's the founder of the Mises Caucus, and he also interviewed Jacob Hornberger, who and both of them were talking about the Mises Caucus, and I was just like, oh, this is interesting. And went through the website that they both mentioned and kind of got in through there because I was really interested in understanding about economics. One of the things that I really appreciated and liked about libertarianism was the stance on being anti-war, which was something that's always been very important to me, and freedom.
So So the Mises Caucus brought you got in through the Mises Caucus and through podcasts. It seems that's interesting. And when did you go to Cuba, and when did you discover the Mises Caucus about?
Oh, I went to Cuba in 2000, and it was funny because it was right around the election of George Bush Jr. And that whole, I was in Cuba when they had not yet like finished counting. And, you know, so it's kind of like this big joke over there that like in the United States, like they hadn't yet figured out like who the president was and all of that. So that was a really long time ago. I joined the Mises Caucus probably, I would say in 2018, right around that time.
Yeah, so 2018. So yeah, so that's
so definitely pre-COVID.
Yeah, definitely before the Corona insanity hit us.
Yeah.
So and what's your experience been with the Mises Caucus?
My experience has been incredibly positive. I would say that I wasn't really active in the beginning. Like I became the organizer back in 2020. But really up until that point, it was more just being involved in like the Facebook groups, and I was a delegate for Vermont in 2020. And that was online, and, you know, it was part of the Mises Caucus, but we really were not as organized as we were later on. But my experience has always been positive. I always found it, I mean, comical and annoying, to say the least, like to see like some of the accusations that are brought about members of the Mises Caucus, because they're really untrue. And I think that one of the big issues is that so much focus and energy is with people's interactions on Facebook or on Twitter, which is not the real world. And, you know, people get these impressions of certain individuals based on like this interaction that they'll have in a Facebook group, and never really kind of having a conversation or being in the real world and I don't know, working with them. And so to hear like, you know, like we're recruiting like alt-right people and all this stuff, it's really comical. But the pinnacle for me was when we were at the National Convention in Reno, and I actually got to see like all of these Mises Caucus folks that I know in person, right? Like I know these folks in Facebook, I know them on Twitter, I know them in like the Discord groups and through Zoom meetings and having conversations and things like that. But to actually see all these folks together, and when we were sitting at the convention and I could see like who all the Mises people were, I realized we're actually the most diverse caucus in the entire Libertarian Party. And I think, to me, my observation is that a big part of the tension has been people's reaction in the corona through the corona fascism, just for lack of a better word. And I think that there were people within the Libertarian Party who wanted to be just kind of not pushing back, not questioning anything, kind of just wanted to go along with the mandates, not really questioning things. And I think for other folks, including myself, how folks and how libertarians responded, how our leadership in the party responded to, you know, to the corona pandemic, the fascism and all of that. I'm calling it corona fascism because I'm helping Alu Axelman translate a book into Spanish, and the name of it is Corona Fascism. But, you know, the pandemic response, I think for a lot of us, it became a litmus test of how people responded, and if they were really about challenging authoritarianism, challenging government overreach, challenging big government. And it seemed like folks had a hard time with that. And I think in a lot of this tension, especially leading up to the convention in Reno, it seemed like there was this unspoken tension. I mean, I can't figure out another way to describe it. Because to a lot of the folks who were not only already in the Mises Caucus, but who were coming into the Mises Caucus, like a lot of these folks were activists, and they were activists with pushing back against the mandates and the lockdowns, and someone like Angela McArdle, who was organizing marches, who was working with businesses in California, with legal assistance, and eventually, the Mises Caucus in California, they made a documentary about what the lockdowns did to businesses. It was really huge, and I think it was something that made the caucus much stronger. It certainly made us bigger because a lot of people joined the party directly because of how we were responding in our respective states to the government response to the pandemic. And I think that set us apart in a lot of ways. And I think for that reason, by the time we get to May 2022, Reno, Nevada, we are such a huge contingent of the Libertarian Party, because I think throughout the country, folks were looking for some type of a political movement or a political voice that was pushing back against this. And we really were the only ones in terms of political organization. You have some Republicans individually here and there, but up until that point, like the leadership of our party, the former leadership of our party, really didn't even mention it until when was that? Like 2021.
Yeah.
By then, it was the disappointment and the frustration with members at that point was already past. And, for example, in my state, there were quite a few like grassroots organizations that came up and that I had become active with, because the Libertarian Party here hadn't done anything. And so I was just channeling my energy and got to a point where I was just like, these are the people that we have to bring in. And so as a Mises organizer, I started doing that, like talking with folks about libertarianism, about the Libertarian Party, about the Mises Caucus. And, we are the ones that are fighting for liberty on the ground. And we need folks like you to come in and join us. And that was happening all over. And that's one of the things that has really grown our party.
Yeah, I really, it was interesting to see it happen. I do want to give credit where credit is due. I remember in March of 2020, Nick Sarwark put a video about some new test they'd come up with and how the feds were restricting it. There were some cases where the LP was saying, okay, we need to get rid of regulations on vaccines. We need to get rid of regulations on medical stuff, which is stuff the LP's always done, but there was never any. And I think there were some people out there, a lot of people who just saw this whole thing as an overblown media hype. And that was what I did. And I think it turned out to be right. And
yeah.
And also certainly, the kind of people who listen to Alex Jones and those people, I mean, Alex Jones was certainly opposed to all of this too, because, but that's not necessarily crossover with the Libertarian Party, but there were factions out there. But yeah, I was behind Angela all the way also because of her work against this.
That was really one of the things that for me that really inspired me to step up my game and be a better organizer for the party, was seeing people like her and Michael Heiss and other Mises members throughout the country, in different states, who were really doing an incredible amount of work organizing in their state and pushing back against this. And, Angela McArdle has an incredible work ethic. She is, she's relentless in a good way. And she's really inspirational. And so and so those of us here who were active in our party, really saw like a lot of what she was doing, and got inspired, and we're trying to do that here, and sharing that and showing people. And that really got a lot of people excited in Vermont, and I'm sure, in other places, to get involved and to really want to, in our case, like resuscitate our party. And I'm sure that's the case in a lot of states where there is this element of, we're a political party, and it's not just about existing to hopefully run one or two candidates. It's really about being a voice, a political voice for people who are not being heard. And that's what was really needed over the last 2.5 years. And I think that now that the party has leadership that is unafraid to speak, that is unafraid to push back and challenge a lot of these things, obviously not just with the pandemic, but with everything. I think a lot of us now feel like that we finally have an organization that's more representative of libertarianism and of liberty ideas.
Yeah, there's definitely something out there. I mean, the leadership, was timid, and I think the harder part for me was not just the party, but I saw other organizations out there. Cato was very timid about it. Reason seemed to be very timid about it, and I think a lot of them realized their credibility among libertarians really dropped during all this. And I think a lot of libertarians have just written them off now. It's kind of sad, really, because I'd rather have those organizations be strong with us than be without us. But we'll see what happens. Yeah, you were in Reno Reset. What do you think of some other factors, though? And I mean, with the Reno Reset, I mean, does the Reno Reset happen if Karen Harless doesn't get removed from the LNC, for example? I mean, I think that stirred up a lot of people too.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting what happened in New England, right? So first you have this coup in New Hampshire, or the situation that happens in New Hampshire, and so like that was definitely something that made us start to realize what is going on. We had our situation here in Vermont where, some of the leadership in the party was gatekeeping, and there was like no activity happening. And we were trying to, membership was trying to get things happening. And it was just like, again, like just kind of, people that like were afraid of change. And then we see what happened in Massachusetts with, with the purge, right? The purge of the 47. Yes. And at some point, I'm like, what is it with New England? What is in the New England waters that is just making these folks, not want to just follow through and I don't know, do genuine like liberty work? Because there seems to be this trend of folks who are kind of comfortable and didn't want people who were, wanted to speak out and who, wanted to push this party, our respective, parties forward. And we also saw that in Delaware. So yeah, I think that definitely contributed, because that was kind of like, I think if you imagine like, when you have, like an earthquake, like there was definitely like tension and schisms like throughout the party. And I just think like in our region, like it just definitely came to the surface. And I think certainly a part of that was, the trajectory of the national leadership up until that point. And, and certainly, unfortunately, like we find out later, like I believe that, the leadership at that time was involved with some of the stuff that was happening in Region 8. So, and potentially like, in other regions where there have been these situations. But certainly I think these were just where a lot of this tension was erupting. And thankfully, we came out, we were able to kind of move forward. And certainly what happened with Karen Ann, with her, I'm going to get the wording wrong, but essentially like where she was removed as secretary, And I think one of the most important moments, like, you know, when we talk about the Reno Reset, is when we were able to make that motion of basically exonerating her and, you know, putting her back in her rightful position as secretary of the LP. And I think people don't realize symbolically that was really important, right? Because she was a whistleblower and she didn't do anything wrong, although, you know, people want to paint it like she's some evil person. What happened in New Hampshire was wrong, and she let us know what was happening in New Hampshire. If it hadn't been for her, it would have been something that stayed really local, and it wouldn't have gotten the attention that it needed to get. And it was part of something bigger. What was happening in New Hampshire was part of something bigger. But so there's that part of it that's important. But the other part of it, and the reason why that was important, is because this is something that affected her personal life. It affected her ability to get work. I mean, when you have something like that happens and you're part of a political party and you want to do, you know, you want to do work as a, oh gosh, I'm blanking out, but you want to do the type of work that she does, you know, paralegal work or whatever. Yeah. You know, people look things up and they see this and they're like, wow, wait a minute. Like, we don't think that we can hire you for this position for, you know, for the type of work that you do as a parliamentarian. That's what I was blanking out on. Yeah, well, yeah. It was important for that purpose too, to kind of make right and make her whole in that way. And I think for us, in terms of like the Mises Caucus, it was really important that we made that right too.
Yeah, and Karen, I mean, she knows Robert's rules. Up, down, back, left, right, backward, forward. I mean,
she lives for it.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody living for something as boring as that.
Though. There's a small who do.
You know, I said to her, I said, you know, you could go out and be a Robert's Rules consultant, you know, and consult with people on that. I mean,
for all types of businesses, for all types of organizations. It's fascinating. And it's funny because when I, you know, was like talking with her and a couple of other parliamentarians that she connected us with for what we needed to have to move forward here in Vermont. It is really fascinating. Like I could see people really getting into it. I mean, at one point I was like, I'm kind of interested in learning more about Robert's Rules, and you start looking up all these different organizations, but it's really interesting. I mean, it's a really great way to, you know, have meetings and understand rules. I mean, it's this standard that's been around for a really long time, but anyway.
I know there are others, but I don't know that. But yeah, certainly. And I think the opponents of the Mises Caucus it seemed like they didn't really look in the mirror, and if they'd maybe done other things, they would have done better. And I want this party to have healthy competition. Yeah. I want those people, if those people said we have to, you know, there are people out there that say they want to, you know, take the party back over, said, well, go out and recruit. That means we've got more people. And I've said to them, you also need to get out and start some podcasts. I think
and caucuses are important. You know, people are like, oh, we should get rid of caucuses. And I'm like, why? There's a women's caucus. There's a Hispanics caucus. There's the radical caucus. Caucuses are good. It's where, you know, you can focus on particular areas of your interests and work together in smaller groups, right? I mean, we're all individuals. We want to kind of be able to different work. We're not a monolith. Our party has to have diversity of ideas and approaches to libertarianism. Everyone who thinks you only get to liberty in one way, it's really boring, because, you know, what's going to work in New England is not going to work in the Midwest, right? Like, we all need to come with different ideas and things like that. So it's important to have diversity. I think that our situation is that you had small groups of people who are making accusations that then other people it's one of the things, right? Someone says like a gossip, and then no matter how many times you correct it, like that, people just keep going on with it. And so now we're in this place like a year and a half or 2 years later, where there's been this idea that somehow like we're racists or we're homophobes or we're transphobes, and people just keep repeating it. Like, oh no, but this was said and this is going on, and this is what the group is. And it's like, it's not. But at some point, are we going to actually do liberty work, or are we just going to be inside this weird social media space where nothing really happens and people are wasting a lot of their time and energy just having these, they're not even conversations, right? They're just kind of going on and back and forth and putting a lot of their energy there. And the liberty work that needs to be getting done in the real world isn't happening.
Yes.
So, I mean, and that's kind of the frustrating part too, because you see some folks that are like good folks, right? That really got sucked into a lot of this negative stuff online. And it really took away from the work that needed to happen in their respective locations.
I also think that there are some troll accounts there out on social media that aren't real people. They just go into various Facebook groups to troll. They'll usually, those troll accounts will usually they won't have a real photograph of the person. They'll usually have a somewhat generic name like Billy Smith.
And we have found troll accounts that have like the Mises emblem on them, and they're saying all types of things, and we're like, who is this person? And we're like, that really isn't anyone that anyone can verify. So, I mean, there's all types of accounts on all sides, and it's unfortunate, but I just, in my communications with people who are like, oh, those Mises people, I'm like, well, I'm one of those people. Like, judge based on the actions, like judge based on like what's actually going on. And if there's something that people say that you don't like, then debate them or have a conversation with them. I think we have some figures in the Mises Caucus who are controversial, but I mean, I've made it a point to meet these people in person and have conversations with them. And it's like, wow, like you have an interesting way of expressing certain ideas that I don't know if I necessarily agree with them or disagree with them, but you're a lovely person, and, and have a conversation and debate with them, right? Because like people can say all types of things on Twitter, like, and there's a reason for that, right? It gets you attention. It gets you people following you. It gets your message across, or it gets people to your podcast or something. And I think people miss the greater point that at the end of the day, like, we're all individuals, we're all people, and we're not necessarily the social media personality in their everyday interactions.
And it's definitely that way. I do wonder sometimes if that's spilling over to online. I've never seen it as bad in the liberty movement as it is right now. And there were always disagreements over various details, but the name calling and the ad hominems were not nearly like this. And I don't know.
I think because
why it's gotten worse, but maybe social media is a factor.
I was going to say, I really do believe it's just the way social media works now. And it's like you can weaponize it in this way too. And I think the pandemic and the lockdowns also had a lot to do with it, because you had a lot of folks who were forced to stay home and spending a lot of time on social media, maybe kind of raging out in that space, and funneling a lot of energy and attention to that. And so would this have been, would the division have gotten to where it was had we not had, corona fascism? I don't know. I think that would be interesting if there was a parallel universe where that didn't happen. I'm sure there would have been some tension, but I don't know if it would have been as great as it has. And I do have to say that, honestly, after the convention, a lot of that has diminished incredibly.
Yeah. And also the fact that it also happened in our presidential nomination year. I mean, the debate over the convention, going to this hybrid convention, which I was of the idea that we have to get the ticket nominated on time, on schedule. If we don't, we risk losing. And if we lose even one state, to me, that was a tragedy. But there were definitely a lot of debate about that too. And, there were people who still couldn't attend in person because of the various restrictions. So,
I mean, if it wasn't for it being hybrid, I would not have been able to do it. But now that I've been to an in-person convention, I mean, it was really difficult to follow. And it was my first convention, period. So I had no idea how it should have been. It was really hard to follow. And now that I've been to a physical one, like there's no way you can do this virtual, hybrid or online. It's too much.
Another thing, and I remember reading an article from 2006. Reno was a very high attendance for an off-presidential year. I mean, that certainly brought in a lot of people. So it got a lot of people working. And I'd like to see exact numbers on that, but I think in 2006, it might have been something like 300. And that was when the famous Portland Plank Massacre happened.
Wow. Yeah, we had well over 1,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed that because I'm 51 and I've been involved with the Liberty Movement since the 90s, I remember, I would go to LP events and I would be the young guy. And now when I'm among the Mises Caucus, I'm the old guy. It seems as though the non-Mises crowd was not doing a very good job bringing in younger members. And I wonder if the Mises Caucus doesn't happen, does the party just get old and everybody dies? I mean, that was I don't like bringing up generational things here, but it seemed to be that way.
Well, that's definitely a factor. I mean, I'm almost your age. We're close in age. We're both Generation X.
I hate that term.
There is certainly, and that's one of the things when I was saying we're the most diverse caucus. We have, we have some boomers, we have Gen X, but we have a lot of millennials. And what's the one that comes after the millennials? Generation Y or something? Like,
there's Y and Z. I don't know how they came up.
I don't know what, but we got them. We had people who were like 18, 19 years old to people who were in their 70s, right? Like we had such a huge range. We had people who were rural. We had people who were urban, right? We had people from all over. We had people along the LGBTQ spectrum. We have people like of all races. So it's an incredible amount of diversity that we bring in, that we continue to bring in. And I think that, it ruffles feathers, I think, because people really want, and they tried to do it even during the convention with the Southern Poverty Law trash that came out. I think like that Reason magazine did something that was pretty ridiculous. And it was just kind of like, are you guys not even like bothering to look around and see who's in the Mises Caucus? At that point, I was just like, wow, the gloves are off, because it's just really blatant lies. Like it's one thing if you're online and you can't tell, but it's another thing when you're in person at the convention and you're seeing all of us. We're all wearing like, Mises Caucus, right? Like we're having our Mises bash. You can see who's in there. And to kind of continue this, this narrative that we are this fringe, white, young, male, alt-right group. It's really infuriating after a certain point, because, the people who are claiming to want to be about diversity or inclusion are some of the most folks who have done a lot of alienating and marginalizing and othering that I've seen in a really long time.
Yeah. SPLC has never been on our side. I mean, some of the other Reason is a tough call. I don't know what their motivation is. It's really, that's a really, I don't know. It seems like they want to appeal to the cool kids, and so they have to sort of make fun of the nerd, but then the nerd ends up, but then at the same time they're nice nerds.
I don't know what to think. I mean, I was there. That's Nick Gillespie, right? Reason magazine.
Nick Gillespie is the longtime editor.
Brian
Doherty writes some articles, and
Yeah, I saw him sitting down with Nick Sarwark. I think he sat down with Michael Heiss. I don't know if it was just he already had an angle. I don't know if it was just being intellectually lazy. I don't know if it was just an angle that's fun and spicy and is going to get people reading and is going to get people like, oh, this is some, who knows, right? It's at the end of the day, it's a media outlet. They need readers, they need clicks, right? So it could have just been something to that effect. I don't think we need that negativity, because I think what we're doing on its own is exciting. I think the fact that we do have people like Angela McArdle and Scott Horton and Dave Smith who are, who have these huge followings and who are talking about, the war in Yemen, who are talking about our economy, who've been pushing back against, the corona fascism and, government overreach. I think that on itself speaks to a lot of folks and have gotten a lot of people really excited about liberty again. And that's why, it's kind of like full circle with what Ron Paul did back in 2008 and 2012.
Yeah.
And the fact that we were able to get him to Reno to our Mises Bash was really exciting too. That was really the pinnacle of the convention for me.
Yeah, that's one thing there was this wave of people coming into the liberty movement because of Ron Paul. And then there was the initial wave when the LP started. So like when I was in my 20s in the 90s, I don't think there was a lot of people coming into the liberty movement. And I think by the time people are 30, they've probably made their minds up, but I don't really know. One thing, as I've always thought of myself as a libertarian, but I sometimes wonder if somebody who's always been a libertarian can convert anybody to libertarianism just because they don't know how it's like to be there. But since you once considered yourself a Marxist, how do we go out and convert the Marxists? Can they be converted? What needs to be done? Because clearly what most libertarians are doing is not working.
Well, I mean, I think it's like I wasn't going to be converted when I was kind of at the height of my thought process, because I think when you're caught up in a belief system, when it comes to a belief system, you're not going to convert, whether it's like someone's religion, someone's politics. I had come to a point in my life where I had made a conscious decision that I wanted to get outside of my echo chamber. And it was it was at that point that I was able to have conversations with people who were conservative and right wing, and who were independent, and who didn't, think and look at things the way I did. And, it was a challenge to myself that I had to have. But when I was really when I was in it, I didn't want to have conversations with people that were not thinking the way I thought. And I think that is, so I understand what's happening right now with a lot of these folks who are like hardcore leftists and who don't even realize that they're espousing cultural Marxism. They are in an echo chamber. And when I was coming up politically, I mean, I had people who were Black Panthers to look up to, people who were involved in the Young Lords to look up to. And, this group is, they're looking up to, so my point is like, I had like people who were activists and things like that who espouse these ideas, but like they had some credibility in terms of doing positive things in the community. Now I think it's much more, the messaging is so much more powerful of the government will solve all your problems, the leftism, the progressivism. I mean, it's in everything. I mean, every major corporation espouses these talking points. So the echo chamber is so much more powerful. I mean, and kids are getting it in school. They're getting it if they go to college. They're getting it when they go to the store or online. So it's much more difficult, I think, because of social media and because of all these powerful entities that are reinforcing this type of message. I think the folks who challenge it, or who at least step back and want to ask some questions, are really profoundly more powerful in their character, because it's really difficult to go against the grain when you have so many aspects of society that are trying to funnel you to thinking the same thing. And I think if anything, the last 2 years have showed us is how difficult it is to push back against media and constant propaganda from the government. It's really difficult. And so we see that the few people that are, that have done that, or the few groups that have done that, like clearly, if you've been consistent in doing that, you've come out on the other side of this, somewhat vindicated, right? But the lesson has been for us to understand that it's very difficult to do that. So I think you have to reach people who are willing to at least have a conversation. Because there's a lot of folks that don't want to hear anything different, and getting into arguments and trying to reason and trying to have, debates with folks that really aren't interested in hearing a different perspective. I hate to say it, but I feel like that's probably a waste of energy. You're going to find with people who are, at least they want to know, people who want to ask questions. But at the end of the day, I think it's the way that we message too. I think it's important to us, and I know like folks aren't going to agree, but it's important to have like a New Hampshire Twitter that is wild and crazy and says things. And then to have like, another libertarian affiliate or group that has a different type of tenor in their messaging that's, maybe not as radical and not as outlandish as the New Hampshire Twitter can be, but they serve a purpose, as does, the more kind of, beltway mainstream. We need a little bit of everything. Like some folks kind of need to be jolted and be like, what are they talking about? Yeah. And that gets people excited. And I know like people don't like it, but I think we need all these different levels of messaging. We can't have the safe, let's tweet something that is not gonna get people talking, that is, that's not gonna challenge with our ideas. I think we need all of that, especially right now.
And to their credit, I mean, I think they're getting real results in New Hampshire. Like I think they actually had their state budget in 2022 was actually less money than the state budget in 2021. I mean, those are real results, which we're definitely not getting. I mean, I think that like a lot of libertarians, I really don't care if we win elections. I just want us to go out there and make a difference and push the country in a positive direction, which it clearly has not went in a positive direction in the past 50 years or even the past 100 years.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely a conflict in the LP about that, is should we try to win elections or should we just try to push the country? I also think COVID exposed the divide between what I call moralistic libertarians versus more utilitarian libertarians. You have this one group who are very much said, liberty is about the non-aggression principle. You cannot tell me what to do. I will not, you have no right to give me orders, versus the utilitarian equation is liberty is good because it makes everybody richer, because it achieves good things, because it makes everybody happy, it makes the most people happy. And obviously that's still kind of based on the good of the whole, and that falls flat on its face when you've got an emergency, or even something that wasn't an emergency, but just media hype.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm of the thought that, we need all the tendencies, right? Because there's some people who are going to be really good on certain issues or really good on certain approaches, and that's going to, and I think right now we're at a point where, we're figuring out what works in our realm. Yeah. And so like, I was talking about like New Hampshire, and, New Hampshire has the Free State Project, and that has brought in a lot of folks. What they're doing is working in their realm. Wouldn't necessarily work, let's say, in New Mexico. I don't know, but it's working there. And I think things that are being done, let's say in Tennessee or Oklahoma, Florida, Vermont, I mean, we're all trying to kind of figure out like what is the best way to bring a liberty message. We were able to get people to run as libertarians for the first time in, I don't know, like over 2 decades. Like we have a good amount of folks who are running on the libertarian ticket here in Vermont. And a lot of that, I mean, like, how do you use elections? Like part of it is because we need people to get into office, but part of it too is to allow folks to see that there are other options, tends to start asking questions and to get people out there engaging in the community. So that can be its own form of activism as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many different kinds of activism. I mean, I think we're learning some things that don't work. I don't think we're going to win trying to take over academia, which we've been trying to do for a long time, and there's no progress there. And the Free State Project seems to be doing very well. Maybe that's the way to go, but maybe is Vermont, maybe Vermont will become the Socialist State Project or the Marxist State Project. I mean,
so Dennis Pratt is funny. Like he has, so there's the Free State Project, and I think the other one is like the Progressive something or other. And that's the Free State Project. Like that's their kind of alter ego. And I'm always like, don't send him here. Send him to Massachusetts and Connecticut. Like leave Vermont alone. I have this fantasy that once New Hampshire gets very well established as the Free State, we can start working on Vermont and Maine and create a free tri-state project. Then we'll have 6 senators. We'll have a nice little block in New England. But that's like a 30-year project down the line.
Yes, and maybe earlier today, and as I pointed out, I was talking to a filmmaker from New Brunswick who was working on the convoys up there. So maybe you have all 4 together.
Well, honestly, if you think about it, you can start looking like, look at, let's say, regions or towns or counties where there is kind of a potential. And I mean, this I think is the genius of the strategy of the Mises Caucus. Is our goal really is to focus in as local politics as possible wherever you are. Yeah, it's great if you can run, it's great if you can run a federal candidate, but if you can get folks to run and get on their school board, to get on their town council or their city council, to run for really local things and get in, that is really effective strategy, because those small local municipal government bodies actually have so much control over our lives. And it's really, so our long-term strategy is to try to get as many people elected, like in these local elections, because we can really affect a lot of change in the long. So it's a long game for us, but it's important.
There were some sheriffs out there who said they refused to enforce some of this corona stuff, and sheriffs can be huge. I mean, they have a lot. Sheriffs don't have a lot of power to be tyrants necessarily, but they can definitely nullify bad laws that are coming from higher up. I mean, it's obviously it depends on the state, but yeah, I mean,
I think nullification is going to be a really important strategy in a lot of these types of things, especially moving forward, because I think that a lot of people are seeing firsthand how powerful nullification can be. So in states where you had like mask mandates, and you had even here in Vermont, like there were definitely areas that we figured out where to go, where they were not enforcing mask mandates. Same thing with vaccine mandates, same thing with cannabis, same thing with other things. And I think that's an important strategy to actually communicate and vocalize to people, because a lot of people do that, but they don't realize what they're doing. And I think nullification can be really powerful. And if we can get, sheriffs on board, then that's an incredible shift that can take place too.
Or if we can just get sheriffs elected. But,
yeah. So I forgot his name, but there's Ben Weir is running for sheriff in a county in New Hampshire. So there's
Yeah, the most famous example is Sheriff Richard Mack who was somewhere out in the West. I think he was from Arizona, New Mexico. He goes to conferences, talks a lot about what sheriffs are capable of doing. And they really are huge.
And there was that whole thing. I think it was just like a constitutional sheriff, where you had sheriffs who were saying they would not enforce these mask mandates.
Yeah.
And that was really powerful because, I mean, some of them like were and lockdown. So like there were businesses who were like, we're going to be open, and sheriffs, you know, in some places were like, yeah, we're going to enforce it, and other sheriffs in other places are like, yeah, no, we don't have time for this. We are not going after local business owners. And that was really powerful, especially at that time, because it was at the height of all of this.
Yeah, it was definitely it was very interesting to see who really was out there. And, you know, what do you think the haters of the Mises Caucus really want?
I don't know. I don't think it's as large a group of people as we imagine. I don't think it's folks who are one monolithic mindset. I think there's different folks who focus their energy and ire at the Mises Caucus for a myriad of reasons. I think some of it might be personal. You know, maybe they had a personal interaction with someone or something, or a negative, some type of a negative interaction with something that was, you know, in a group or whatever. And for some folks, they're scared. You know, they're scared of our messaging. They're scared of our tactics. And I think they're scared of the effectiveness of this movement that really, I don't think from what I've learned of the Libertarian Party, there's been something like this in a very long time. And so there's a lot of people, you know, most people don't like change. And I think we represent a shift culturally. We really do push back against identity politics in a lot of ways, definitely with the narrative that identity politics that is getting shoved in our faces. As someone who was a Marxist and that it came up in the 90s when really identity politics was getting really powerful, and it was something that I witnessed was incredibly divisive. Even as a leftist, I saw it as being something that was really divisive and not something that was uniting. I kind of understand the trajectory of it. So I find it a bit troubling to see libertarians who want to use that, but then they're in denial about what using identity politics means, because it's collectivism and it's divisive at the end of the day. It doesn't mean that we can't have messaging that is talking to people's experience, that is inclusive, but we shouldn't be our goal should be unifying. It shouldn't be using it for the sake of using it. I find that to be as empty as when, you know, folks claim to be allies and they use using all of the imagery of the identity politics for their purposes. I find it to be just as empty as when, you know, like when those folks use that. I think there's real ways that we can get out to communities who are marginalized and underrepresented in a lot of ways, and, you know, make liberty make sense. I don't think we have to pander with identity politics the way the left does.
Yeah, I think if we just put out how our message is positive, I mean, it definitely is going to work. But libertarians also very much have a need to be right, so they just don't like being told that they're wrong. And I do think we should acknowledge that a lot of people do put in a lot of work in this. I mean, I remember, you know, Paul Bilyeu, Whitney's husband, you know, said she spent hours working on that agenda for the National Convention, and, you know, it just got. And then, of course, the Mises Caucus just voted, and the body just voted, we'll throw out that agenda. And
Mm-hmm.
You also have to admire Whitney for just showing up, because she was sick I think she was sick when she showed up, and she tried to chair that convention and did for a day. And even though she was and then of course the next day she had to hand the gavel off to Molman because of her ear infection.
Right.
You know, I felt bad for a lot of the people who lost, just because I'd gotten to know them and they'd put in so much work to campaigning. You know, it's, even if I didn't agree with them, I went over and tried to talk to them and said, hey, thanks for, you know, because, and I hope everybody out there works to become a better activist, because we all get better through healthy competition.
Absolutely. And I think one of the important moments of the convention, we had so many great speakers, and I think Spike Cohen did a really great job of kind of trying to bring people to understand like what's happening. And, you know, kind of saying, you know, like, here we are, like we are in a moment right now where things are shifting. And it's hard, but it's shifting in a good direction. He's like, I promise you. And he was just like, we're all libertarians. And, you know, at some point we have to put our differences, our pettiness, you know, to some degree, like some people hate, or just, you know, hard disagreements or misunderstandings kind of to the side, and make a decision. If we're going to move forward and work on building liberty together, this is the time to do it. And he challenged us to, you know, I think he spoke, and after he spoke, there was going to be like an intermission, I think. And I think he said, like, you know, during the break, take time to reach out to folks that are on the other side of, you know, if you're in a caucus or you're not in it, like reach out to those folks and genuinely, like, let's try to build some unity and move forward. And it was really moving. And there were folks who on the Mises side and on the other side, the non-Mises side, who genuinely, like, we like found each other. We gave each other like hugs, we talked, we connected. And that really happened. And there were folks also who made that effort, sadly to no avail. You know, some people just wanted to stay in their mindset, right? And not move forward. But I think it says a lot about the folks who are willing to put things aside, because the bigger picture is what's important. And I think a lot of people did put their differences aside. And I think there's a good amount of folks with goodwill who said, I'm going to see what happens in the next few weeks with the takeover, with the Mises Caucus takeover, the Libertarian Party. And there are folks who express, like, I'm not sure, but I want to give them a chance, because at the end of the day, like, I want to build liberty. And a lot of those folks have really stepped up and are like, okay, like, let's keep working, let's work together. And some of them are like the biggest kind of defenders of, like, yeah, no, like, things are going in a good direction. Our fundraising is continuing to move forward and build. Our membership is continuing to move forward and build. You know, a lot of things are the messaging is consistent and relevant to what's happening in current events, which is something we really haven't had in a long time.
Yes, definitely. I definitely seem to think, I hope we can all have better messaging, and I hope there's more of a way to get things done. It seems like it's definitely an interesting time to be in the party, but I'm hoping we get to be better for this. But
I think we are. I think that's already been happening. It's just hard if we're only gauging the echo chambers of social media, because then it's, you know, then you're trapped in it. And honestly, a lot of that has, you know, after the first couple of weeks after Reno, like, most of that just went to the wayside. And every now and then you'll see folks in certain groups, you know, try to, like, complain or bring something up that's really irrelevant. But I think the amount of work that's happening, and I think the effectiveness of the leadership, from, you know, the chair all the way down to our regional representatives and all the way to a lot of what the affiliates are doing, and the amount of candidates that a lot of us are running, the messaging that's getting out, the support that we have now with national, I think that's making a huge difference.
Yeah. So what's going on with Puerto Rico? Do you think there's going to be an independence movement? I'm very curious about this entire aspect of, and of course, the history of Puerto Rico as a territory and a place where you don't have to pay federal income tax, but they have a fairly high territorial tax. But
it's really interesting. I haven't been involved with that, although I am part of a group. There's a libertarian group in Puerto Rico, which is great. We don't have an affiliate there yet, but it's really interesting. I think Puerto Rico is a really good example to understand. If you want to see when government goes wrong, study Puerto Rico, study the history of Puerto Rico, because you can really see how detrimental. I'm in terms of the independence movement for self-determination, that's something I generally tend to support still. Historically, that's been a very left-wing movement predominated by people of more nationalist tendencies, and more so in the last 40, 50 years by more Marxist, left-wing tendencies, kind of a lot of these different groups. There's always been a friction between those who are more nationalist versus those who are more socialist. And then there's always a combination of the two, which is kind of scary if you think back historically. But it's interesting that right now, though, big government dominates Puerto Rican politics. And if you look, with the economic disaster that is the island and the response to it with more government intervention, the repercussions now, the last few years, and made worse by the hurricanes of about, I think that was 3 years ago now.
yes.
And the government response to that, and all of the corruption that was discovered, by local politicians and bureaucrats later, of all these foods and items that were donated and that were hidden. These I think the governor's wife at the time, she was made in charge of receiving all of the donated items that were officially coming to the island. And it was just found that there was so much, there was such a failure in facilitating that and getting that onto the island. But it's really interesting that there's groups, there's some smart, savvy, libertarian-minded business folks who moved to Puerto Rico, right? Because you can set up your online business anywhere. You don't have to pay federal income tax. And you can kind of figure things out in terms of avoiding that and being successful. So there's that element to it too. I think there's a little bit of potential there for people who are interested in exploring that. And interestingly enough, I mentioned Tom Woods before. I forgot the name of this gentleman, but he interviewed someone who set up a business in Puerto Rico. And it was specifically for that reason. And he was just this is a great opportunity.
Yes. And of course, the one thing that comes up every time also for Hawaiians is the Jones Act.
Yeah. And
and it's funny. Sometimes I wonder about our movement, because we bring this comes up every time something like this happens, and yet nothing gets done. It just still stays there, even though it clearly does need to be thrown.
What do you call it in English? In Spanish, it's cabotaje. The cabot. It has to do with the merchant marine.
Basically, it's all goods shipped, say, from the mainland to Puerto Rico.
They have to go right. They cannot
American
go
ships, American crews. It all has to be. It's definitely makes it harder to get stuff in and out of Puerto Rico.
Well, and it makes it much more expensive, which is why certain things, it's so much more expensive. And in Puerto Rico, it used to be a producer of a lot of things, and now it's an importer of most things, which makes folks much more dependent on the government. Most Puerto Ricans living on the island are Government employees, like it's the number one employer is the government, whether it's, teachers or police or some type of bureaucratic, that's like the number one employer. And honestly, like the infrastructure is crumbling, right? So many people, professionals like nurses and medical doctors, they've left the island. So because of the economic difficulties and just looking for places where they can, live and get paid. So that's created a health crisis on the island because you have so few places to go. So like, even if you go to the hospital, the waiting times are going to be really long. You're not, and we see that to a certain extent because of the lockdowns and the long-term reverberations of that in our economy. But that's been a standard there for quite a long time, where you just don't have the people working. So for people who need to see a specialist, they actually have to fly to the mainland to try to see specialists for like health, and not everyone can afford that. So it's really created a really bad health crisis over there.
I can imagine it's it almost seems like Puerto Rico would be better off independent, but now they've gotten this. But now it's like, what is this going to break? We're going to lose our jobs. It's an unfortunate.
I think it would be an interesting transition if they were just simply start, right? Like, what do we talk about as libertarians? We're talking about decentralizing and opening and allowing the free market. If we just got rid of the Jones Act and allowed local government to start be able to have direct importation from the Dominican Republic, from Jamaica, from Colombia, from Ecuador, right? Because that's the region. I think that would start to generate, if let's say you were able to have, Puerto Rico used to be one of the largest pharmaceutical producers. Now everything's being produced in China. We should bring that back. We should have more pharmaceuticals being produced much closer to the United States. Like, and that really was a hub of industry and employment.
And maybe tropical fruits and I believe sugar as well. Yeah.
I mean, it used to be the agriculture economy was really destroyed during Operation Bootstrap in the 50s when they, around like World War II and after World War II, when they wanted to radically transform. And so they industrialized and brought in a lot of factories. But yet then it disconnected people from growing their own food and land. But there's been a food sovereignty movement in Puerto Rico, albeit a small one. But there are folks who are kind of getting back to wanting to produce quality foods on the island.
Yeah, I've never understood the centralization of food. It just doesn't make any sense. And I mean, for so long we've consumed food that probably didn't come from more than 10 miles away. It's not like, and food is a perishable item. It's not like it's easy to ship around. It's,
well, and that's where you see like the role of processed foods and chemicals and all types of things, right? And we see it now, the effects of these types of things in our health, right? Like we're the most unhealthiest we have ever been, and part of that is because we're so disconnected from the food system.
Yeah, we definitely become disconnected.
But we want to find like what is that balance, because we do want to have access to the different types of foods that we want to eat too.
Yeah, I mean, I love to have some baked Alaska salmon, even though I've never been to Alaska.
Right?
Of course, that stuff's not cheap, and they probably could get some good seafood in Puerto Rico. I hope.
I think that these companies that do like the food boxes, like where you can order. I mean, I think that's great, and you can get stuff direct from like farmers now, and from different. You can get like a seafood shares. Like where you pay monthly and you get them like from all types. And I think that is an incredible shift in the way that we can access food. And especially like where we can access food from folks in places that align, let's say like, oh, you want pasture raised pork that eats a certain type of diet, and you can, there's these options for you. So it's interesting the way things are moving. But certainly we need a lot less government regulation in how food is produced. And I mean, I live in Vermont, which is very rural, and there used to be over 60,000 dairy farms, and now there's less than 6,000. And so we definitely need like cottage laws and a lot less regulation that really puts pressure on small family farms.
There's a lot more regulations coming from the feds, although I know in some cases the territories are sometimes exempt from some of these federal regulations.
So I think for tax purposes, like in Puerto Rico, there used to be like a tax, not tax, it was called like 936 that gave gave companies like tax free for a long time, and now there's like another one. But the problem is that manufacturing to a large degree left to go to China and Southeast Asia, where they can, pay a lot less. So.
Well, it sounds good. I mean, sounds like it's very interesting. Is there anything else you want to say before we go? It looks like it's a good time to wrap up at this point.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about the convention. I love talking about the Mises Caucus. I love sharing my experience, and like you, I hope we can, just build bridges and keep moving forward and building a liberty movement.
Yeah. And hopefully, I don't know if you keep track of what's going on in Venezuela or Cuba. I mean, do you read some? You're bilingual. I assume you read some of the Spanish-speaking outlets. I mean,
well, I have family in Venezuela, and I do follow like a lot. I haven't followed recently, but I was following for a while, like stuff that was happening in Cuba. I was surprised to learn that there was actually a libertarian party in Cuba. Sadly, like a lot of those folks have been targeted by the government. Many of them have been arrested, but and it really put perspective for me of like how spoiled we are here in this country in a way, and how lazy we are as libertarians in a lot of ways, that you can have these folks who are living under absolute tyranny, under a socialist dictatorship, and they still have the wherewithal to organize themselves and to openly be libertarian and talk and meet and have meetings and talk about it and share about it. And we're busy with all this BS infighting, where we have a lot of work to do. And so I get a lot of inspiration from Cuba and from those people who are really fighting for everything there.
And they're putting their lives on the line. Well, it's been great talking to Olga. We can find you on, you have your own YouTube channel, Latina Libertarian, and I'm going to give you the video files and you can upload that to there as well. So
thank you. And people can find me at olgamaria.org. And there's a link for my Latina Libertarian podcast there. And also my professional, I'm a herbalist and an acupuncture physician. So people can find different aspects of what I do there too.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you, Olga. It's been great talking to you.
Same. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Bye-bye.